The wind snakes through the olive groves like a thief in the night, slipping through cracked shutters and resting cold fingers upon your bare feet. The hearth is dark, the wood long since burned, the coals now nothing more than the memory of warmth. In the distance, a church bell calls, not to prayer, but to labor, to hunger, to duty. Your hands are blistered, your stomach taut with emptiness, and still the day must begin. Beneath robes worn thin by 1,000 sunrises, your bones remember softer mornings, but Byzantium does not yield, not to tears, not to toil, and in this empire of gold and silk, you are but mud beneath the boot. If this glimpse into peasant life in Byzantium stirred something in you, tell me. Could you have carried that silence in your belly through a lifetime of dust and duty? Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. The wind moved first, slipping through the laurel branches and brushing the thatch like a breath, tired to stir a storm. Beneath the straw roof, where the scent of wet earth clung to the walls and the corners gathered silence like dust, you stirred. Not because of a rooster's crow or the stirrings of the sun, but because it was simply time. Time to rise before the world asked anything of you, and give it more than you had left. Your back ached before you sat up. Your breath steamed in the pale blue dark, rising to meet the dew curling along the rafters. Somewhere behind you, your mother's hands were already moving, folding, pressing, kneading dough with a rhythm that had become prayer. She did not look up. She did not need to. This was the rhythm of survival, carved into the bones of every woman born too far from the capital to be remembered. Outside, the olive trees waited in rows, their silver leaves trembling as though they too remembered what it was to hunger. This is your empire, not the one gilded in mosaics and saints, but the one of damp floors, blisters, and a sun that brings no leisure. If this story begins to wrap around your thoughts like morning mist, subscribe or share with someone who finds stillness in forgotten lives, and tell me, could you have endured the silence before the sun? The fire had long since died. Only its ashes remained, faintly warm, nestled into a pit circled by stones. Your youngest brother slept curled in straw, his lips parted, one hand clutched around a fragment of cloth once blue, now nearly grey with wear. You stepped past him softly, wrapping your cloak, thin and mended, across your shoulders as you pushed open the crooked wooden door. Outside, the land exhaled. You were met not by chaos, but by the calm of labor waiting patiently to begin. A donkey stirred in its pen. Chickens rustled beneath an overturned basket, and beyond, the slow groan of the land rising into hills, scattered with trees bent not by wind, but by time. The village itself was little more than a cluster of mud and stone, each house leaning into the next like tired men in line for bread. Smoke would rise soon, and with it the sounds of another day. But for now, there was only this, the stillness of a world too old to rush. You walked toward the well, your feet bare against the soil, the cold biting but familiar. Every step pressed you deeper into memory, into the grooves carved by others, who walked this same path, your father, his father, and the nameless ones before them. Byzantium had a long memory, but no voice for its peasants. The bucket creaked as it descended, the rope worn smooth by 1,000 hands. Water sloshed, cold and clear, and you braced yourself before lifting it free. The weight was always heavier. Then you remembered. Your mother was bent over the table when you returned, her eyes fixed on a crack in the wall that let in a thread of light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. You placed a bucket by the hearth, knelt, and fed the coals. A few embers blinked back to life. You offered them kindling, breath, hope. The baby began to cry. Your sister rolled over beside him, eyes rimmed with sleep, hair tangled like dry grass. She hushed him gently, whispering an old lullaby that barely reached your ears. And above all this, above the hunger, the dampness, the grind of another nameless day, lay a silence more complete than death. A silence broken only by duty. Byzantium, they said, was eternal, God's kingdom on earth, a place of light, law, and glory. But here, in your village, 2 weeks' ride from the nearest fortress, a lifetime from Constantinople, eternity, came in different forms. It came as cracked hands and aching knees, as borrowed land and broken promises, as bread made from flour mixed with bark, just to stretch the meal. Your father was already gone. To the fields, no doubt. He had left before the crows began their gossip. He moved like a man who had long since stopped thinking of himself. The land was not his, and yet it demanded everything. You followed the dirt path through olive trees, whose trunks curled like old men's spines. The tools waited: a hoe with a splintered shaft, a basket patched with leather, a sickle dulled by time. You gripped them with hands too young to be this weary. Around you, the air carried the scent of damp stone and dust. A fig tree stood crooked at the edge of the grove, its fruit not yet ripe, its branches stretching upward like supplicants. A single bird called from its perch, echoing through the valley. You thought then of the stories you had heard, of emperors draped in purple silk, their voices echoed in gold-domed halls, of women perfumed and veiled, of servants who poured wine from silver pitchers. You tried to picture it. You failed. The image would not take. All you knew was this: the quiet scrape of your hoe through dry earth, the itch of straw against your skin, the way your stomach always seemed to shrink against itself before midday. Byzantium was not made for you, but it lived through you, in the sweat you shed, the crops you grew, the taxes you paid. And if the capital was the mind of the empire, you were its feet, dirty, calloused, and forgotten. Midday came, and with it the sound of bells, not from a church, but from a distant herd moving down the ridge. A shepherd passed, nodding. Once, his face hidden beneath a sun-bleached hood, he carried a lamb over his shoulders, small and trembling. You sat beneath a laurel tree, breaking a crust of bread with your sister. She said nothing, only handed you the larger piece. You offered it back. She refused. This too was a ritual, a dance of silent sacrifice. And in that moment, with the sun warm on your face, and the ache of your limbs folded into the roots of the tree, you felt something not quite peace, not joy, but endurance, the kind that makes the bones stronger than stone. By evening, the smoke from each hovel would rise like incense, the scent of lentils and firewood drifting over the hills. Children would laugh, briefly, before being hushed, and your mother would hum that same song as she worked, a tune older than the empire itself, and you would lie beside your brother, wrapped in straw and wool, listening to the wind scratch at the walls, wondering if tomorrow would bring change. It would not, but you would rise all the same. The road is dry today, not because the rains have ended, but because the earth has grown tired of absorbing sorrow. Dust rises around your ankles with each step, clinging to the fabric of your tunic like a warning. You walk slowly, not from weakness, but to delay the inevitable. The grain sack on your back is half full, more than your family can spare, less than the taxman will deem enough. Still, it is all you have. And today is the day Byzantium takes its share. The sun is not yet cruel, though it watches with quiet judgment. Its rays streak across the olive groves and fall unevenly on the dirt path that cuts through the valley like a scar. You walk this road every month, though it never feels the same. Sometimes it is lined with flowers, sometimes with footprints of soldiers. Today it is empty. Only the wind walks with you. Your sister did not speak as she tied the bundle for you. Her eyes remained fixed on the hearth, where 2 crusts of yesterday's bread waited like ghosts. Your mother handed you a strip of cloth soaked in vinegar to keep the dust from your mouth. Then she kissed your cheek the first time in weeks and said nothing. That was how you knew it would be a hard day. The granary stands at the edge of the village, near the house with painted walls, a house that belongs to no peasant. Its stones are carved with lions, and the door is framed in imported wood. You've never crossed its threshold. You hope you never will. A soldier greets you at the gate, his helmet tilted back, revealing a face both young and hollowed. He does not smile. He does not need to. The spear at his side speaks louder than any threat. He waves you through with a hand stained in sweat and old ink. Inside, the air smells of grain and mold, of leather and smoke. The floor is layered with husks, and every sound echoes as though shouted into a cave. You join the line of villagers, backs bent, eyes lowered, sacks over shoulders, like burdens they were born to carry. No one speaks. Words would only remind you how close you are to begging. The official sits behind a table too wide for one man. His robes are dark blue, trimmed in thread meant to mimic gold. His fingers are long and yellowed at the tips. They move over parchment with disinterest, pausing only to tap the table in impatience. His eyes scan each peasant like a ledger, measuring not just the weight of grain, but the worth of the soul that brought it. You watch as an old woman steps forward. Her sack is light, too light. The official frowns, then nods to a soldier, who takes a hen from her basket without a word. She does not cry. Her mouth twitches once, and she steps aside. Your turn comes. Faster than expected, you move forward, your sack heavy against your spine, the breath in your chest folded like parchment. The official does not look up at first. He dips his quill in ink, scrawls something on a sheet, and only then lifts his eyes. They are the color of figs left too long in the sun, soft, spoiled, and sweet with rot. He asks your name, you give it. He asks your father's name. You give that too. Then he gestures to the scale. The soldier next to him, older, silent, eyes like cold iron, lifts your sack without effort and places it on the pan. The chains creak. The scale dips, slowly, too slowly. The official sighs. This is less than your share. He says, not with anger, but with boredom. The tax is for the whole family. 5 mouths in your house. Yes, you nod. Your voice has gone somewhere else. Perhaps it has returned to the olive grove. The official picks up a wax tablet, taps it with a fingernail. You'll owe the difference next month, or the livestock. You start to explain. The goat died, the vines bore little, the rain came. Too late, but his eyes glaze over. He's already moved on. Then he leans forward, just slightly, and says, or the girl. The words drop like a stone into a dry well. You hear them echo inside you. You nod again, not in agreement, but in understanding. You take your empty sack. You step aside. The world continues. Outside the granary, the air feels thinner. You sit for a moment under the shade of a fig tree, the bark warm against your back. Another boy from the village sits beside you. His hand is wrapped in linen, a wound from the fields perhaps. He says nothing, only offers you a bite of a date stolen from the basket of an official's cart. You chew slowly, it tastes of sweetness, and the walk home is longer, not in distance, but in spirit. You pass the vineyard where the soil has cracked open like parched lips. You pass the old well where a girl once fell and lived to tell the tale, though no one speaks to her anymore. You pass the stone marker carved with the cross, the one that leans further each year. At home, your mother sees your face before. She sees the sack. She knows she says nothing. She returns to the bread, now rising in the bowl, and presses her hands into it with more force than needed. Your sister doesn't ask. She begins to pack the herbs for tomorrow's market. Your brother sleeps beside the hearth, unaware of the cost of survival, and you sit beneath the laurel tree and watch the sun begin its descent. The empire took what it needed, but it left something to a hollow, a silence, a wound that does not bleed, but never quite heals. And tomorrow, the road will wait again. The light fades early here, not because the sun sets too soon, but because the smoke rises too fast. By late afternoon, every chimney breathes like a tired old man, coughing plumes of grey into the sky. The village becomes a soft silhouette, its outlines blurring into ash. You walk the narrow path between hovels, ducking beneath low beams and laundry lines, your feet tracing the same ruts worn by generations. The smoke curls into your hair, your eyes, your lungs. It clings to you like memory. The huts press close together, not from design, but from the instinct of warmth-seeking things. Each is patched with whatever could be found: bark, pottery, shards, strips of sailcloth once used by a soldier. Roofs sag with the weight of years, and the doors creak like they remember every hand that ever pushed them open. Inside, the air is thicker still, thick with steam and soot and the breath of many gathered around fires that do not warm as they once did. You step into your own hovel, ducking under the doorframe worn smooth by your father's head. The smoke inside is sharp, a mixture of dried dung and olive wood. The fire spits, low and petulant, casting flickering shadows on the walls where spider webs glisten like forgotten lace. Your sister stirs a pot with the slow, absent-minded rhythm of someone who has done it too many times. Lentils today, maybe with a hint of onion, if the garden gave anything worth picking. A good meal by your standards. A famine's supper by any court's tongue. Your mother kneels by the loom, her fingers dancing through warp and weft, weaving not just fabric, but hours, days, the seasons of a life too busy to name. She does not speak, neither do you. The fire cracks once, then again. You listen to its voice, trying to decide whether it speaks in warning or comfort. Soon, others arrive, neighbors, cousins, that one old man who smells of vinegar and speaks only in questions. It is always like this after dusk. Families sharing a single flame, stories pass between hands as if they were bread. There is no privacy in a village like this. Everything unfolds in full view. Grief, birth, arguments, love. A child might be conceived in the same room a grandfather dies. Laughter and lamentation never sleep. Far apart, the old woman next door leans in through the curtain of sackcloth that acts as a door. She brings a little broth, seasoned with wild herbs. She talks about her dead husband, how he once stole a hen from the bishop's garden and swore the rooster had confessed his crime in a dream. Everyone chuckles. not because it's funny, but because it's remembered. You sit near the fire, cradling your bowl, and listen. The stories are small, uneven, half-true. One is about a boy who rode a goat into town and returned with a wife. Another about a saint who once bled wine instead of blood. There's comfort in the absurdity. Truth is too heavy to carry through. The smoke, beside you, the little boy who lost his mother last winter leans against your knee. He has not spoken in weeks, but he stays close to the fire and close to you, and that is something. Someone passes him a crust. He chews it without looking up. A girl sings softly in the corner. Her voice is thin, strained by cold and hunger, but there's a tremble of hope in it. She sings of a star that never dims, of a shepherd who always returns. You close your eyes and let the melody settle over you like a woolen cloak. Briefly, the smoke lifts, then the pot is scraped clean. The bowls are stacked. The girl's song fades. Outside, the wind shifts, and the fire draws harder, sending a rush of black smoke into the room. You cough. Others do too. It's a familiar sound, like the creak of a door or the snore of a sleeping uncle. Your eyes sting. You don't wipe them. There's no use. The smoke always wins. Your father arrives at last, his shoulders bent, his tunic dark with sweat and soil. He sits by the fire without removing his boots. His face is unreadable, carved in shadow. No one asks how the vines fared. The silence speaks plainly. There will be no wine this winter as night deepens. The hovel fills with the sounds of settling bodies. Some curl near the fire. Others wrap themselves in cloaks made more of threadbare hope than thread. You share a corner with your sister, your knees touching, her breath soft against your shoulder. She hums a lullaby your mother used to sing. A tune too old for memory, but still rooted in your bones. The smoke thickens now. It's a blanket, a veil, a thief. It steals the stars, the smell of lentils, the color of your sister's eyes. You feel it coating your teeth, your skin, the back of your throat. You breathe it in anyway. There is no other choice before sleep takes you. You think of the city of Constantinople, where lamps burn clean and halls echo with music rather than coughs. You wonder if smoke ever touches the emperor's robes. You wonder if he even knows. You exist, and then, as the fire dies down and the last whispers fade into crackling embers, you remind yourself of something older than the empire. Warmth shared is still warmth. A lie told with kindness is still kindness. And a home, no matter how small or smoky, is still home. You drift into sleep, wrapped not in cloth, but in breath-warmed air. The hum of others' dreams, and the stubborn, sacred glow of coals that refuse to die. She had once made the fields sing, not with birdsong or the rustle of barley, but with a voice that danced like sunlight on spring leaves, bright, pure, mischievous. Her name was Melina, and though she was no richer than any of you, she carried something that seemed to defy the weight of your world, a laugh too full of life, and a song that made even the priest's face soften into something like youth. You remember her voice more than her face, the way she would hum while digging weeds, the way she would spin in circles just to see the sky move above her. Once she sang at the feast of St. Basil, and every mouth in the village went still. Even the dogs seemed to listen. That was before the fever came. Now she lies in the corner of her family's hovel, wrapped in wool stiff with damp, her cheeks flushed in unnatural pink, her lips dry and cracked like sunburnt clay. The voice, her precious floating voice, is barely a whisper, and when she tries to speak, The sound falters, breaks, and vanishes altogether, like a bird with one wing, like a story half-dash told. You visit because your mother tells you to bring broth. Not the good broth that is for your sick brother, but enough to look like kindness. The village must keep up the performance. Everyone gives something, not because they have it to give, but because not giving would be too honest, too frightening. Illness is a mirror you don't want to look into for long. Her mother opens the door with hands that tremble. They were once strong, weaving, kneading, gathering, but now they shake like branches in autumn. She nods, offers no words, and steps aside. You enter. The air is thick with boiled herbs and wet wool. The fire is small, flickering as though unsure if it belongs. Melina is curled into a shape that used to be her, small and still, her brow damp with fever sweat. A rag rests on her forehead. Her breathing is shallow, uneven. Each inhale feels like a question without answer. She sees you, barely. Her eyes move, and for a moment you think she smiles. But then her lips twitch, and nothing more comes. You place the bowl beside her. She does not reach for it. You kneel. You whisper her name. Her mouth opens slightly, as if to respond, but only a rasp emerges, a sound like paper tearing. She closes her eyes again. Her mother crouches beside her, murmuring things too low to catch. Prayers, perhaps, or memories the village healer had come yesterday. A woman of few words, she had pressed Melina's wrist between her fingers, sniffed. Her breath examined her tongue. Then she gathered thyme, nettle, and feverfew, made a poultice, and tied it with flax to Melina's chest. She left behind a warning, softly spoken. The body might heal, or it might not. Sometimes it depends on whether the spirit still wants to sing. You stay for a while, long enough to feel helpless, long enough to wonder whether kindness means anything when it can't cure. Outside, children chase each other with sticks shaped like swords. Their laughter pierces the still air like a hymn sung off-key. You flinch. Melina's mother sighs. She was always strong, the woman says, barely louder than a breath. But sometimes it's the ones who shine the brightest, who fade the fastest. You nod. There's nothing else to do. You leave the broth behind. You close the door gently, as though the air itself might fracture if pressed too hard. That evening, you return home to the smell of turnip stew. Your brother is coughing again, but it's the dry kind, not the kind that steals breath. Your sister is mending a tunic with blue thread, her fingers swift and tired. Your mother scrapes ash from the hearth. No one speaks of Melina. Speaking her name would make the fear too real, too close. That night, in the shared hush of sleep, you dream of her singing again, not from a sick bed, but from a field, sun overhead, flowers at her feet. Her voice is whole, ringing across the grove like a bell calling the weary to rest. But when you wake, the smoke is back, the cold, the silence, and you do not know if the dream was memory or mercy. The next morning, word spreads through the village with the slowness of sorrow. She is not dead, not yet. But her voice, the thing that made her more than the rest of you, may never return. The healer says she could live. The fever may break, but the song, that wild light that once leaped from her mouth, is gone. Something inside her has been scorched, the way fire hollows wood until it looks whole from the outside. But as ash within dot, in the weeks to come, she will sit by the fire with her mother, lips pressed shut, eyes staring somewhere past the smoke. Children will still run past her door, men will still gather for bread and gossip. Life will go on, but the music will not, and Byzantium will never know what it lost. Just a peasant girl with a cracked voice, a song that died before the singer. But you will remember, because once, for a moment, she made your world shimmer. And even if the empire forgets, the fields might still hum her melody when the wind is just right. The wheels arrive before the voice, wooden and thick-rimmed. They roll down the main path of the village with a rhythm that does not belong here, not like the shuffle of bare feet or the limp sway of donkeys. No, this sound is foreign, heavy with the promise of movement and the weight of something finer than survival. Children chase after the cart, their sandals flapping against the earth, their voices shrill with curiosity. You follow more slowly, wiping your hands on a cloth still warm from baking. The cart halts in front of the well. Its driver hops down, boots landing in the dust with a jarring finality. He is younger than expected, though his manner speaks of distance, not the kind measured in miles, but in comfort. His cloak is dyed deep green, fastened with a brooch shaped like a winged lion. His beard is trimmed, his hands soft. A trader. Yes, but not one of yours. He lifts the canvas from his wares, and color spills out like spilled honey. Bolts of silk dyed crimson and cobalt. Baskets of lemons and figs that shine like polished coins. Tiny jars of something that smells of cloves and sun. The villagers gasp. You are not immune. Your fingers twitch at your sides. The cloth alone could feed your family for a month if torn into pieces and sold one scrap at a time. From Constantinople, he says, with a smile that does not touch his eyes, by way of Nicaea, for those with coin or something of value, to trade. The words hang in the air like incense in a church, thick, sweet, out of place. A few brave women step forward. One offers eggs, another a necklace carved from bone. The trader examines each with exaggerated slowness, then waves them away. Nice, he says, but not quite. He wants more. He wants linen, spice, silver, or the promise of favor from someone who walks in silk. You stand at the edge of the crowd. Behind you, a boy gnaws on a turnip, his eyes fixed on a set of golden bracelets displayed like sunbeams on velvet. He does not understand their uselessness. You do. You know what gold cannot buy, rain or land or mercy from the taxman. But still, you watch. The trader begins to speak of the capital. Not the capital you know, the name whispered as a curse when the tax is due, but a shining city of domes and saints. He tells of banquets with 10 courses, of dancers who twirl like smoke, of fountains that run with rosewater. He speaks of mosaics that shimmer like stars beneath the Hagia Sophia's dome, of horse races that shake the very bones of the earth, of an emperor whose robes trail behind him like rivers of light. Around you, the villagers listen with open mouths. Your neighbor's daughter clutches her chest as if the words might bruise her. Even your mother, hardened as she is, allows a brief sigh to escape her. And you are angry, not because he lies, but because you want to believe him. The trader sees this. His smile sharpens. He offers a taste of honeyed dates to a small child who takes it with reverence. Then he begins to sell. One woman offers her wedding cloth, the last gift from her dead mother. He takes it without blinking. Another gives a silver cross, stolen, perhaps from some forgotten chapel. It disappears into his pouch with barely a glance. By afternoon, the trader has filled a sack with treasures you had all long considered worthless, and he has left you with spices you cannot eat, fabric you dare not wear, dreams that do not belong to you. As he turns to go, his cart now lighter and richer than before, you meet his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he pauses. You have kind faces, he says, but you carry your poverty like armor. You say nothing. You do not thank him. You do not curse him. You simply watch as the wheels turn again, churning up dust and memory. Later that night, by the fire, your father says, they always come before winter. And you know what he means. The traders, the takers, the ones who sell light to those who've never seen the sun. Your mother finishes the last of the lentils. She's quiet, but you see it. A single thread of silk tied around her wrist, taken in trade for a day's bread. She strokes it like a relic, as if it might bloom into something more. You go outside and sit beneath the olive tree. The stars are out, cold and unblinking. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere farther, gold glints from a palace window. You dig your fingers into the dirt. It's warm, soft, familiar, and for the first time that day, you breathe deep. You are not gold, you are mud, but mud grows the wheat. Mud buries the dead. Mud remembers the footsteps of every emperor who's ever walked this earth. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. The rumors came first, whispered in the mouths of passing herdsmen and traders with dusty cloaks and careful eyes. A village to the east had been emptied, its men conscripted by force. Another to the north, burned in the night. They said invaders had crossed the border, that the emperor would send men to meet them. But not his men, yours. You were turning the soil when you heard. A boy ran breathless through the olive grove, shouting names. Yours was not one of them. Not yet, but your brother's was. And just like that, the war you never saw, never asked for, opened its hand and took what it wanted. He did not cry. Neither did you. You remember the way he packed. Careful, slow, quiet. A cloak, 2 crusts of bread, a belt with a rusted dagger your father once called lucky. Your mother stood in the doorway, her lips pressed into a line too thin to speak. Your sister plaited his hair one last time. Your father handed him a satchel of dried figs and closed his eyes. The soldiers arrived at dawn, not on horses, not in gleaming armor, but on foot, with tunics soaked in old blood and eyes too old for their faces. One of them coughed constantly. Another limped. They read names from a scroll and did not wait for protest. One boy tried to run. He did not get far. You walked with your brother to the edge of the village, where the road meets the olive hills. He did not speak, but you did. You told him to stay warm, to eat slow, to tie his sandals tight. You told him you would keep his carving knife safe until he returned. He smiled, small, sad, and touched your shoulder. Then he walked away. You watched until the line of men became just another shadow in the trees. The days after felt hollow. Your mother cooked without tasting. Your father returned from the fields with his hands shaking. Your sister began sewing every evening, as if trying to stitch the world back together, one thread at a time. You took your brother's chores. You tried not to look at the empty corner where he used to sleep. News was slow when it came at all. A cousin heard from someone in the next valley that there had been a battle, that the Byzantines had won, that they had lost, that the dead were buried in trenches, that they were left to rot. No one knew, everyone feared. You saw more soldiers in the following weeks. They passed through with swords sheathed and faces closed. They took food, sometimes coin. Once, a girl. No one stopped them. The empire needed loyalty. The empire needed sons. One evening, the priest said a prayer for the fallen. No names were spoken. Only the wind answered Dut. You began to hate the silence most, the way it sat beside you during supper, the way it lingered in your father's footsteps, in your mother's eyes. Your brother's shoes still sat by the door, collecting dust. Then, 3 months later, a messenger came. He was barely older than you, riding a mule too thin for the road. He wore a tunic stained with ink and sweat. He carried a satchel filled with scrolls and a face that had seen too many doors closed. He called your name. He handed you a parchment sealed in red wax. You did not open it. Not right away. You carried it to the grove, sat beneath the fig tree your brother once climbed, and listened to the rustle of leaves before breaking the seal. The letter was brief, formal, hollow. Your brother had died. There had been a skirmish. He had not suffered. The empire thanked your family for its sacrifice. That night, your mother did not weep. She ground grain until her hands bled. Your father dug a pit behind the hut and buried the knife your brother left behind. Your sister burned the thread she had been using. You did not speak for 3 days. When the villagers offered condolences, they came in the form of bread and boiled roots. No one had extra, but they gave anyway. You took the offerings and stacked them neatly. Then you sat by the hearth and stared into the fire until your eyes ached. You dreamed of your brother that night, standing in a field of poppies, whole and laughing. He asked you what took you so long. When you reached out to touch him, he crumbled into ash and blew away. The war was never yours, and yet it had marked you. The olive grove no longer sang. The mornings felt heavier. The crows, once merely pests, now sounded like warnings. And still, Byzantium stood, untouched, adorned in gold, its emperors seated on thrones of silk. Far from the soil, the loss, the ache of homes without sons. You rose the next morning. You walked to the grove. You pressed your hands into the earth. And you worked, because the land, at least, still knew your name. It started with a cough. Not yours, not yet. But a sound that sliced through the smoke one evening like a knife through ripened figs. Sharp, wet, too deep to ignore. It came from the old man who lived beside the granary, the one with the twisted spine and eyes that had seen too many winters. At first, no one paid attention. Coughs were common. Cold nights, damp air, wood smoke, they all made the lungs stir. But then the cough deepened, turned to fever, and then silence. By the 3rd day, the old man's door stayed shut. By the 4th, the smell began. Thick, sour, like boiled meat left in the sun. A boy was sent to check. He came back pale and empty. No one went after him. You remember the way it spread, not in fire or thunder, but in small, invisible threads. A sneeze here, a shiver there, a child with flushed cheeks, a woman with dark circles beneath her eyes, a girl who collapsed, carrying a jug of water, the clay shattering as she fell. By then, you all knew, the plague had come. It had walked into your village on quiet feet. There was no warning from the capital, no priest bearing relics, no physician with herbs or wisdom, just the knowledge passed from whispered lips. This sickness does not forgive. The priest called a fast. Said sin had invited the pestilence, that your hearts were to blame, that perhaps if you gave up bread, God would give up his wrath. But fasting meant little when the harvest had already failed. The first child to die was your cousin's son, barely 4 summers old. One morning his breath rattled. By sunset, he was gone. The body was wrapped in linen, soaked with vinegar, and placed beneath the almond tree. The dogs found it before the grave was dug. You helped chase them away with sticks. You can still hear the snarls. After that, the deaths came faster than the shovels could dig. The village ran out of candles, then out of prayers. Mothers tore cloth from their skirts to bind around mouths and hands. The healer boiled vinegar, burned juniper, and drew crosses in soot above doorways. It did nothing. Your sister fell ill on the 12th day. She stopped speaking by evening. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. Your mother wrapped her in wool, laid damp cloths on her forehead. You crushed herbs until your hands turned green. Nothing worked. She burned like a coal. You sat beside her all night, watching, listening, holding a cup of water she could no longer drink. The fire in the hearth had long since gone out, but the heat in the room remained, not from flame, but from fear. When the sun rose, her fever broke. She lived, but her hair thinned, and she walked with a limp after that. A strange tremble took her hands. She never sang again. You were lucky, that's what they said. But luck is a bitter taste when the world around you rots by the end of the second week. The bell stopped ringing for the dead. There were too many. Graves were dug in rows, shallow and hurried. Lime was poured. Names were forgotten. The priest buried 2 of his own kin and said nothing. Not even a hymn. One morning, you woke to find the healer gone. Her hut was empty, swept clean, as if she had vanished into smoke. Some said she fled. Others said the plague took her, but her disappearance left the village quieter than ever. You began to fear touch. A brush of fingers felt like a curse. You washed your hands until they cracked. You stopped shaking hands. You slept beside the hearth alone at night. You dreamed of hands reaching from the earth, mouths open in silent screams. And through it all, Byzantium remained silent. The empire had walls, borders, legions, but no answer for this. The capital stayed distant, gilded, serene. There were no decrees, no comfort. Only the old world dying in pieces, one breath at a time. Your father wore garlic round his neck. Your mother burned rosemary. You whispered psalms into the sleeves of your tunic. Still, you woke each morning wondering who would be missing by nightfall, and yet life did not stop. The bread still had to rise. The goats still needed milking. The vines still needed trimming. You worked with grief strapped to your back, like a sack of stones you could never put down. One morning, the coughing stopped. No one died that day, or the next. Slowly, silence returned, not the stillness of death, but the hush of something broken beginning to mend. The air smelled of earth again, not rot. Children began to laugh quietly, as if afraid the plague might hear and return. You counted the missing, 18, maybe more. You could no longer tell whose doors were shuttered from mourning or fear in the ashes of illness. You learned something bitter. Not everyone who lives survives. Some are merely left behind. Your sister began to speak again, though her voice came softer. The priest lit candles again. You swept the hearth, and for the first time in weeks, you stepped outside without holding your breath. The plague had walked in, and it had walked out, but it left footprints, and they would never fade. The grave was barely deep, enough you remember the thud of soil against wood, dry, dusty, impatient, the way the shovel struck stone, and your father cursed under his breath. The wind was sharp that morning. slicing through your cloak like the blade of a dull knife. Beside the grave, your mother clutched a worn icon in her hands, her knuckles white, her lips unmoving. She did not cry, not then, not after the third funeral in 2 weeks, not even when the candle she had lit for your cousin blew out in the wind. She had no tears left. But Byzantium did not care about tears. 3 days after the burial, the collector arrived. He came not in mourning, but in ceremony, dressed in black robes, trimmed with crimson thread, his shoes polished, his seal swinging like a threat from his belt. He came with scrolls, with ink, with laws. He came for the dead. We need coin. For the burial ground, he said, glancing at the fresh mounds behind the chapel. For the lime, for the gravediggers. You stared at him. His voice was smooth, practiced, his words wrapped in apology, but sharpened with authority. We've given what we have, your father said, his voice hoarse. Eyes red from sleeplessness. The collector nodded, as if he had heard that before. He unfolded a list. Your house still has 1 goat, a loom, a copper pot, a daughter of marrying age. You stepped forward before your father could answer. We buried 3 in 1 week, and the empire honors your sacrifice. The man said, not unkindly, but the law is clear. He tapped the scroll. The tax for death is to nomis martyr, 1 for the burial, 1 for the purification. The emperor has decreed all souls must be honored with dignity. Your mother laughed then, a short, sharp sound that startled even the chickens. Not at the words, but at the idea that dignity could be bought. The collector looked away. He had other homes to visit, other debts to collect. He gave your father 7 days. Then he left, his sandals scraping the path like the sound of coins rattling in a bowl. You did not eat that night. No one did. Instead, you sat in the silence, staring at the ledger your father had hidden behind the firewood, the list of what little remained, a tunic, 2 blankets, a hen too old to lay. No one mentioned the pot. It would go first, your sister. Sat by the loom, her fingers motionless on the thread. She whispered something you couldn't hear, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. The next morning, your mother took the copper pot to the trader. He weighed it without a word, handed her a pouch with 5 coins, and turned away. No questions, no condolences. She walked home slowly, her hands clenched around the bag. Not because it was heavy, but because it was shameful. When the collector returned, he took the coins, marked your family's name with a line of red ink, and said, "May the souls rest." You wanted to scream, not at him, but at the world that required payment for pain. But no one screamed in Byzantium, not out loud. Later that week, you helped a neighbor bury her husband. She had no coins, only a bundle of dried rosemary and a silver cross her grandmother once wore. She left both on the body. The priest hesitated. He muttered a blessing, then turned away. That night, the dogs came. You did not sleep. The tax on tears, they called it. A fee for the sanctity of the dead. A price for remembrance. A ritual wrapped in law, cloaked in faith. The villagers began to whisper about selling children to pay for burial, about girls taken to the city as servants, never to return, about the old man who buried his wife in secret under a fig tree, because he could not pay. One morning, you woke to find the chapel door chained shut. No more space, the priest said. No more coin. The dead would have to wait. Your father, once a man of few words, began to speak less. Your mother lit candles without names. Your sister stopped weaving, and still. The empire wrote laws, issued decrees, sent collectors. Gold for death. Even in grief, the land owed. But one evening, as the sun bled across the stones and the wind howled through the olive groves, you saw something. A child placing a flower on a fresh grave, a single wild iris, purple, trembling in the wind. No coin, no incense, just beauty. You stood beside her. You didn't speak, but in that moment it felt like defiance, because no tax could touch that. It began as a glow on the horizon, soft at first, like the last light of a setting sun. But there was no sunset. The sky was already dark, and the moon hung above like a pale, uncertain coin. You stood at the edge of the vineyard, a bundle of firewood in your arms when you first saw it, a dull red smear above the ridgeline, pulsing faintly. Alive. Your father joined you. He said nothing, just stared. Then came the smell. Not the dry, acrid burn of cooking fires or the scent of pitch used to seal barrels. This was different. Heavy, bitter, unmistakable. The stench of burning thatch, of scorched flesh, of ruin. The wind carried it down into the valley like a curse. The village grew quiet. No laughter, no songs. Even the dogs fell silent. A few of the elders gathered outside the chapel, murmuring prayers. The priest held his crucifix tighter than he ever had during plague or famine. You knew the village beyond the hills, smaller than yours, poorer too, but familiar. Your mother had a cousin there, a soft-spoken woman who baked barley loaves shaped like suns. You'd traded onions for eggs in their square. Heard their shepherd play his reed pipe as dusk bled across the fields. Now Larkos was on fire. At first there were questions. Was it bandits, an accident, a lantern tipped in wind? But then the soldier arrived, a rider, lean and grim, cloak torn and mouth lined with dust. He came not from the east, but from the west, the road to the city. He spoke to the priest in low tones, but you were close enough to hear. Rebels, he said, or so they say. The priest's face twitched. What rebels? The kind that forget their place, the soldier replied. Farmers who refused the grain levy, hid their stores, struck a tacksman with a shovel, and so the soldier shrugged. The governor sent a warning, that's what they called it. You returned home and placed the firewood by the hearth, hands trembling. Your mother stirred the pots slower than usual. Your sister didn't speak. She watched the hills, face pale. The red glow still flickered in the corner of the sky. The next morning the smoke drifted into your valley, soft and grey at first, then darker. It clung to the trees, settled on rooftops, laced the bread like ash. A boy from Larkos stumbled into your village at midday. He was barefoot, covered in soot, blood crusted in his hair. His eyes were hollow. You and the others gathered around him near the well. He drank without speaking. He didn't look at anyone. The chapel, he whispered. They locked the doors, set fire to the roof. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed. My sister was inside. No one spoke after that. He stayed in the village for 2 nights. Then he vanished. Some said he walked east. Some said he drowned in the stream. Others said he followed the smoke back home. You still think of his eyes. The elders began hiding what they could, sacks of grain, jars of oil, spare tunics. Your father buried 2 baskets beneath the fig tree, swearing even your mother to silence. You were told not to speak to strangers, not to wander far. The fire reached your dreams. You saw your own village burning, the chapel crumbling, your mother's loom blackened and broken. You awoke with the taste of smoke in your throat and your brother's name on your lips. Though he had long since died in the war, the priest offered a sermon the next Sabbath. He spoke of obedience, of order, of the emperor's divine mandate. But his voice wavered, his hands shook, and when he raised the cup, only 3 dared sip. One evening, a new face appeared in the square, a man with a scar down his jaw and eyes too sharp for a farmer. He asked too many questions, stayed too long near the granary. The next day, he was gone. So was a chicken. No one said anything. Still, the smoke lingered. You began to forget what clean air smelled like, what stars looked like without a haze, what dreams felt like without fire. The empire called it rebellion. You called it survival. They burned a village to remind you of your place, and it worked, for a while. But when you passed the fig tree and saw the basket buried there, the earth still loose, you felt something rise in your chest. Not anger, not yet, but something close, a spark. Because if Byzantium could turn a sister to ash over a sack of grain, then perhaps the real fire had only just begun. It came with a whisper, not from your village, but from a rider in dust-stained robes, his voice soft, but his words sharp as flint. He stood in the chapel courtyard, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial blade, as the priest read aloud the newest decree. From Constantinople, from the emperor himself, all icons, painted saints, carved relics, sacred images were to be destroyed, removed, erased. You remember the stillness that followed, not disbelief, not outrage, just a heavy, cold silence, like the moment before. A pot slips from a table and shatters. Your mother gasped. A child began to cry. The priest's hand trembled around the parchment. The rider only waited, one hand on his sword, the other on his decree. The saints had watched over your village. For generations, painted with ochre and wine, they gazed down from hearths and rafters, their eyes solemn, their halos flaking but still bright. Each home had one, a Madonna cradling a child, a martyr pierced with arrows, a bearded prophet holding a scroll. They were more than images, they were kin. You remembered the icon above your own hearth. It showed Saint Thecla, her robe crimson, her eyes filled with a sorrow that never left you. Your mother kissed her fingers and pressed them to the saint's feet every morning. Your sister whispered to her before sleep. You, when no one was watching, asked her to bring your brother back from the war. Now, they said, she was forbidden. The next morning, a soldier entered the village, not to kill, not to burn, but to collect. He moved from house to house, taking what he was shown. Some families surrendered their icons with bowed heads and clenched jaws. Others offered only empty shelves, but not all were so compliant in secret. The villagers gathered beneath the olive grove. Your father spoke little, but he dug deep beneath the fig tree, beneath the roots. There, wrapped in cloth and sealed in wax, he buried your icon. Others did the same, beneath floorboards, inside jars of grain, behind loose stones in the chapel wall. It became a ritual of defiance, a new kind of prayer. The priest, once solemn and obedient, began to tremble. He feared being watched. He stopped using names in his sermons. He stopped meeting eyes. One night, you found him in the chapel, holding a broken piece of an icon, the face of Christ, worn smooth by 1,000 kisses. He wept without sound, and yet the law continued. The rider returned with more soldiers. This time they searched. More thorough, less patient. You watched as they tore through the healer's hut, smashing pots, throwing ashes to the wind. In the neighbor's house, they broke a wooden crucifix over a chair and left the splinters behind like bones in your own home. The soldier sniffed the air like a dog. His hand brushed the hearthstone where the saint had once hung. He asked your mother, "Where is it?" She met his gaze. Gone. Her voice did not shake. You held your breath. He looked at you, then at your father. He seemed to weigh something in his mind. Finally, he turned and left. That night, your sister asked if God had left Byzantium. You didn't know how to answer. You began to dream of empty walls, of saints with no faces, of candles burning without light. But still, you remembered where they were hidden. You remembered the patch of dirt beneath the fig tree, the way your mother pressed the cloth to her chest before letting it go, the way the wind changed when the hole was filled. One day, the icons would return. You believed that, not to temples, not to halls of gold, but to the homes of those who kept them warm through silence. Because the emperor could command fear, but he could not command love. And in the hearts of peasants, in hovels of smoke and ash, the saints still lived, buried, yes, but breathing. The fast came with the first thaw. Thin threads of green crept into the fields, timid and small. The frost lifted its grip from the stone paths, though the mornings still bit your fingers as you pulled water from the well. The priest announced it solemnly. Lent had begun. 40 days of hunger, silence, and the stripping of desire. But you had already been fasting for months, not out of devotion, but of necessity. The barley had gone soft in the sacks, the lentils rationed in half handfuls. The goat gave less milk each day, and the hens clucked without laying. There had been no meat since midwinter, not even bones to boil. When the priest spoke of suffering as a sacred act, your father did not look up. Your mother crossed herself, but her hand trembled. You sat in the cold chapel, the scent of old wax and wilted laurel hanging heavy in the air, and felt a strange hollowness inside. Not faith, not rebellion, just exhaustion. Lent was meant to bring you closer to God, but you were already kneeling every night, not in prayer, but in pain. You didn't need a holy calendar to remind you that want was eternal. Your sister whispered that the priest had wine hidden beneath the altar. You didn't believe her, not until you caught the glint of a cup in his hand one dusk, and the flush in his cheeks that no chill could explain. Still, you obeyed. You skipped even the thin stew. You let the bread go to your youngest brother. You drank boiled nettles and chewed salted leaves. The hunger gnawed at you like an old tooth, dull but relentless. You didn't fight it. You wore it. The village grew quieter. No singing, no games, no gossip. Just work, breath, and the scrape of spoons on wooden bowls. The fast settled in your bones. Your dreams changed. You stopped dreaming of food. Instead, you saw water, clear streams you could never reach, fruit that vanished when touched. Once, you saw a loaf rise in the ashes, only to crumble into dust when you tried to share it. And yet, even in this bleakness, there were moments. You remember the evening your mother found a forgotten jar of honey buried in straw behind the oven. She did not cry out. She did not gloat. She dipped one finger, tasted, and passed it to you. You shared it between 6 mouths, each drop precious as gold. It was the first sweetness in weeks. That night, no one spoke, but the silence felt full. Another evening, the sky broke open with rain. Soft, warm, generous. You ran barefoot into the grove, letting the water wash your skin, your hair, your eyes. You laughed out loud. The sound startled even the birds. Your sister joined you, spinning in slow circles, arms outstretched like wings. The fast still held you, but it had not broken you. The priest preached of Christ's suffering. He spoke of deserts and temptation, of 40 days without bread or water. He said the Lord chose to suffer. You wondered what it meant to suffer without choosing. Your neighbor's child grew thinner. His ribs showed through his tunic. Your mother made broth from onion skins and weeds. You swallowed it without complaint. You began to believe that even pretending to eat was a kind of mercy. And then came the third Sunday, midway through Lent, the day of feasting. A brief reprieve, but there was nothing to feast with. No fattened lamb, no sweet wine, only flatbread made from chestnut flour, and a cup of rainwater passed hand to hand. Still you sat. Together you ate slowly. You gave thanks, and that night, for the first time in weeks, your belly did not ache. You lay beside the fire, wrapped in your cloak, and watched the embers pulse like tiny suns. Your sister sang softly, low, a lullaby from childhood. You did not know the words. You didn't need to dot in the dark. You whispered your own prayer, not for meat, not for riches, just for the rain to keep falling. And maybe, if the saints still listened from beneath the fig tree, for one spring without sorrow, he arrived at dusk, when the sky burned the color of old wine, and the shadows stretched long across the valley. He came on foot, his sandals little more than scraps, his robe torn at the hem and streaked with the brown of countless roads. His beard was wild, his hair matted with the dust of distant places, and his eyes quiet, sharp, watchful held. Stories he did not speak. He said his name was I. No title, no boasts, just a name carried like a stone in the mouth. The village watched him with a wary reverence. A monk, yes, from where, none knew. Mount Olympus, perhaps, or the shattered monastery near Nicaea. He did not say, he only bowed low before the chapel door, kissed the splintering threshold, and asked for bread and a floor to sleep on. Your mother, who trusted few men and fewer strangers, gave him both. He stayed, not for a night or a week, but through the turning of the season, when the almond blossoms faded and the fields stirred with the hum of early summer. The monk was still there, moving through the village like wind, through tall grass, quiet, constant, unseen until needed. He asked for nothing, not even thanks, but he gave much. He mended the loom your sister had nearly abandoned. He dug new channels near the vineyard, redirecting water that had long gone wasted. He tended the sick with herb poultices and long silences. He spoke with the priest, but gently, always gently challenging his sermons, not with fire, but with stillness. Children followed him, not out of awe, but because he listened, truly listened. When a boy broke his leg, Ionikios sat beside him for 3 nights, telling stories of lions who walked with saints and rivers that remembered your name if you wept into them. You, too, were drawn to him, not for his wisdom, but for the way he saw without judging. He once sat beside you for an hour without speaking, just watching the way you tied branches into bundles, as if the act itself was a form of prayer. One morning you found him staring at the chapel wall, the one where the icon used to hang. His eyes lingered on the blank plaster, as if he could still see the face of the saint behind it. "I carry mine in here now," he said, tapping his chest. You did not answer, but that night you returned to the fig tree and whispered a name to the soil, just in case. The villagers grew used to his presence. They called him the Still One. The children drew circles in the dirt where he sat, as if afraid he might float away. One evening, the tax collector returned, demanding the priest's records. His tone was curt, his boots still stained with travel. He mocked the chapel's broken doors and the empty altar. Ianikios stepped forward, bowed, and offered him a cup of water. The collector sneered. "Do I look like I need your charity?" Ianikios didn't answer, just held out the cup. Still, after a long pause, the man drank. The next morning, he left without collecting a single coin. Whispers spread that the monk had powers, that he could bend wills with his silence. Some began to kiss the ground where he walked. Others feared him. He stayed through the season of threshing, helped gather the grain, sat beside the dying, whispered prayers for the lost. He never led the liturgy, never claimed vision or holiness, but he knelt beside the same stones you did, and when he prayed, it sounded less like asking and more like remembering. Then, one morning, he was gone, no goodbye, no note, just an empty space by the chapel wall and the faint scent of lavender. On the breeze, your sister found a piece of woven cloth near the fig tree course, plain and shaped like a cross. You placed it in the hearth nook, beside your father's carving knife and your brother's old sandal, a shrine of sorts, a place to remember the ones who left gently. In the days that followed, the silence he'd once filled began to speak. The grapevines grew straighter where he'd trimmed them. The looms sang truer where his fingers had mended them, and the hearts of the villagers, though still burdened, felt a little less alone, because the monk had stayed, not forever, not even long, but long enough to remind you that not all messengers ride in chariots or bear banners of war. Some arrive with dust on their feet and leave with your silence softened. The day smelled of rosemary and dust, not perfume, not celebration, but the scent of crushed herbs spread over the chapel floor, and the fine grit of dry earth rising from the heels of those gathered to witness what the priest called a union and what your sister, behind still lips, called a sentence. She was 17, with eyes like bruised plums and hands calloused from loom work. She stood at the edge of the chapel doorway, wearing a gown that had once belonged to your aunt. It was too short at the wrists and too wide at the waist, but no one noticed. They only looked at her hair, braided tight, pinned back with a thorn blossom, a crown of sorts. Her husband Tubi waited beside the priest, Stathis, son of the miller, broad-shouldered, with hands like shovels and a voice that rarely rose above a grunt. He did not smile, he did not frown. He simply existed, solid and inevitable. Your mother stood to the side, lips pursed, eyes flicking between the groom and the floor. Your father watched the ceremony with his arms crossed, his body stiff as cured leather. There was no music, only the low murmur of prayer, the scrape of sandals, the rustle of straw pressed into the floor. You remember the way your sister's hands didn't stop trembling. The priest recited the rites, words worn thin by repetition, promises that landed in the air and fell like ash, to love, to cherish, to endure. That last word lingered. Endure, it always did. When it was over, they shared bread and watered wine. The guests offered gifts, a goat tethered to a fig tree, a jar of honey, a cracked comb carved with stars. A few women sang, though the song was slow, more lullaby than joy. Your sister sat beside her new husband and stared at the cup between them. She sipped once, then set it down. That night, the village danced. Not wildly, not with abandon, but with the tired sway of people who knew how to celebrate survival. You stood at the edge of the square, watching the light from torches shimmer across faces that had grown hard from hunger and loss. Your sister danced, too, for a time, her husband's hand heavy on her waist, her smile practiced, like a mask, made of wax. When the music slowed, she stepped away, found you by the fig tree. She didn't speak, only leaned her head against your shoulder and exhaled. Later, in the darkness of her new home, a hut near the stream, with a slanted roof and a hearth that smoked, she would lie beside a man she barely knew. He would not hurt her, but he would not understand her. An understanding, she had once told you, is rarer than kindness. In the days that followed, she rose before dawn, swept her new threshold, baked bread and fetched water. She wore her hair differently, spoke less. She learned his rhythms, when he would return, what he would ask, how long he would sit before sleeping. She returned to the loom once. Her fingers hesitated, then moved. You visited her weekly, brought onions, sometimes a spool of thread. You asked how she was. She said, always, I'm fine. But sometimes, when the air was thick with heat and the fields hummed with cicadas, you saw her by the stream, barefoot, walking along the rocks with her arms out, as if balancing on the edge of something invisible. She never sang again. One evening, you found her staring at the fire, not tending it, just watching, her eyes unfocused. You sat beside her. After a long silence, she said, I thought marriage would feel like stepping into a house, but it's more like being handed a shovel. You didn't respond. There was no response. She smiled, just a little, then handed you a piece of bread, still warm, rough at the edges, but made with her hands. You ate in silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, an owl called into the dark, and you understood that she was not broken, just bent, like a young tree twisted by wind but still rooted, still growing, even if in a different direction than she had once imagined. In Byzantium, marriage was often a bargain, a field for a daughter, a cow for a wife, a future for a womb. But your sister was more than the trade, more than the straw bed and the fireless nights. She was the flame beneath the ash. You heard the crack before you saw the boy fall, a sharp, wet sound, like a stick breaking over stone, followed by a gasp that didn't quite become a scream. You turned toward the chapel steps just in time to see little Jorgos drop to his knees, a smear of red already blooming across his cheek. The soldier stood over him, leather strap dangling from his fist, eyes narrow beneath his crested helmet. The boy had been playing with the icon, a simple thing carved wood, worn smooth by generations of fingers, with the faintest remnants of paint still clinging to the folds of the Virgin's robe. It had been hidden behind the altar since the decree. Someone had tucked it beneath. A loose flagstone, Jorgos had found it, picked it up, smiled. The soldier didn't ask questions. You rushed forward, but your father held you back. Not with words, just a hand to your shoulder, heavy, unmoving. You watched as the boy was hauled to his feet, blood running from his mouth, eyes wide with confusion. The soldier barked something about heresy, about disobedience, about imperial law, and then he threw the icon into the fire. Gasps, whispers. The priest's face blanched. Your mother clutched her crucifix so tightly her knuckles turned white. The chapel filled with smoke, not from incense, but from burning cedar, flaking gold leaf, and a memory too sacred for flames. The boy did not cry. That night, no one spoke. At supper, you sat by the hearth, watching the embers shift. Your sister stirred the stew without looking up. Your brother traced patterns in the ash with a stick. Your mother lit a candle and placed it in the window. "For the saints," she whispered. Later, your father pulled the curtain closed. "They'll be watching for signs now," he said, "even small ones." The next morning, the soldier returned, this time with another man, not a soldier, but an officer, robed in dark blue, carrying a scroll with a wax seal. He spoke with the dry patience of someone used to obedience. "We are not here to punish," he said, "only to restore order." But the word punish hung in the air like smoke. He ordered the chapel emptied, the icons removed, the murals scraped from the walls. The villagers stood in silence as a ladder was brought in, and two young soldiers began chiseling away at St. Michael's wings. The stone cracked, the paint crumbled, dust fell like snow. You could not watch. You stepped outside, past the olive trees, into the grove where your mother had once buried the icon of St. Thecla beneath the fig tree. You knelt there, not to pray, just to breathe. Later that week, you saw the boy again. Jorgos's face was healing, but his eyes were not. He stood near the well, staring at his reflection in the water, silent. He didn't flinch when you were greeted. He didn't respond when you asked if he wanted to play. You left a plum on the edge of the well and walked away. The soldier remained in the village for a week. He slept in the chapel, now emptied of its saints. He drank your wine, ate your bread, watched you from behind narrow eyes. Once, you caught him staring at your sister. You did not sleep that night. Then, just as suddenly as he came, he left. He did not say goodbye. He did not apologize. The chapel doors were left open. The wind moved through the hollow space like a morning song. The priest stopped preaching, not from rebellion, but from shame. His voice was hoarse when he tried. His hands shook as he lit the candles, and his eyes never lifted above the floor. You wanted to believe the saints were still there, even in the bare stone, even in the cold light that streamed through the window each morning. But it was harder, now. The absence rang louder than any bell. That night, you walked alone into the grove, dug carefully beneath the fig tree, pulled free the cloth-wrapped icon, worn, smudged, but whole. You held it in your hands and whispered not prayers, but stories, about the boy with the cracked voice, the sister who married for a field, the monk who walked away. You wrapped the icon again, pressed it back into the soil, and you wept not just for the saints, but for the world that had forgotten them. The day began in dust, as most days did, but the air was different, not lighter, not cleaner, but charged, the way it felt before. A storm, a kind of trembling beneath the surface, like the land itself was holding its breath. You knew, before anyone said a word, the festival had arrived. It wasn't a festival in the way the capital might know it. No colored banners, no garlands, strung from rooftops, no choirs, no roasted lambs turning on spits while children danced in silk. What you had was simpler and more sacred because of it. A few sprigs of basil at the chapel door, a table scrubbed clean and dressed in white linen, a jug of sour wine shared by 30 mouths, bread, real bread, carried to the village, square like a relic. Your mother rose early, grinding what little wheat she had hoarded through the winter. Your sister lit candles, one for each person the village had buried since the last festival. You swept the path from your door to the square, every stroke stirring memories. You dressed in your best, which was only slightly less patched than usual. Your tunic still smelled of smoke and labor, but it was whole, and today that was enough. They gathered slowly, the elders first, leaning on canes carved with their own initials, then the young, wide-eyed and unsure. The priest walked at the center, robes newly mended, hands held out as if carrying something invisible and holy. And there, at the heart of it all, was the bread, a single round loaf, dark crust, cross-scored deeply into the top. It rested on a board of olive wood, wrapped in a cloth faded from sun and time. You helped carry it. You felt the weight of it in your hands, heavier than you'd expected, as though it held not just flour and salt, but memory. The priest broke it slowly, silently, then passed it, piece by piece, from hand to hand. You took yours and held it, a moment before eating. It was warm still, dense, sweet with fennel. You hadn't tasted anything like it in months. And then, like sun through fog, laughter returned. Small at first, a boy chasing a dog, a girl singing an off-key hymn. The sound of a pipe made from a hollowed reed played with more heart than skill. The village danced, not all at once, not in perfect step, but like the land itself had exhaled, like joy, long buried beneath ash and silence, had remembered how to rise. You danced too barefoot, the dust soft beneath your soles, the stars slowly claiming the sky above. Your sister spun in a slow circle, her braids swinging behind her like a banner. Your mother clapped, a small smile cracking her weathered face. Even your father swayed just once, a motion like a nod to a tune he hadn't heard in years. For a moment, a breath, a blink, you forgot the hunger, the taxes, the silence of the chapel, the soldier's bootprint still stamped on the altar stone. You remembered what it meant to be alive. The fire burned late into the night, not large, not wild, just steady, a glow to gather around, a light that reminded you of stories told when you were small, of saints who wept and warriors who repented, of angels who walked beside olive trees, leaving no footprints. The feast, such as it was, ended with salt and figs. A neighbor passed you a date wrapped in a fig leaf, a gesture older than Byzantium. You bowed in thanks. Later, as you lay beside the hearth, your limbs sore and full, your mind wandered, not toward the capital, not toward the emperor's decrees, but toward a future not yet stolen. You dreamed of planting, of rows of barley, of a child's laughter in spring, and in your dream, the bread you had eaten that day still sat on the table, whole and untouched, its warmth never fading, because for one day you had not been a subject or a survivor. You had been a guest at the table of hope. It happened quietly, as these things often do. No cries, no great final speech, just the wind through the fig leaves and the rasp of breath turned shallow. You had gone to the well that morning, returned with a pail of water, and found him beneath the tree, slumped against the trunk, eyes closed, one hand resting on his knee. At first, you thought he was asleep, but the stillness was wrong. To complete, the kind that does not blink when sunlight shifts across the ground, the kind that does not flinch when you call a name. You stood there for a moment, the rope still, coiled in your hand, the water sloshing softly against the pail. A bird chirped in the olive grove. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then silence. You dropped the rope. Your mother came running when she heard your voice. She did not scream. She knelt beside him, pressed her fingers to his neck, then lowered her forehead to his shoulder. Your sister followed. She said nothing. She touched his hand and kissed it once, then rose to fetch the shovel. The ground beneath the fig tree was soft from last week's rain. You dug with bare hands at first, then with a spade. Your brother brought the cloth you'd been saving, the one woven last winter, never worn. You wrapped him in it, slowly, reverently. He had not been a gentleman, but he had been steady. His hands had built the house you slept in. His back had carried the grain. His silences had shaped your own. There was no priest, no incense, no chant, just the earth, the smell of leaves, and the hush of grief held too tight to cry. You lowered him in, covered him with soil, smoothed it flat with your palms. Your mother lit a candle and placed it in the window. Your sister poured a cup of wine and left it by the hearth. Your brother sat beside the grave long after the sun had dipped behind the hills, saying nothing. That night the house felt unfamiliar, too large, somehow. The fire burned lower, the walls seemed thinner. You tried to remember the last words he had said, something about the vine, that the south corner needed pruning, that the soil was too damp, that the goat was favoring her left leg. Nothing grand, nothing heavy with meaning, just the rhythm of living. Your mother didn't sleep. You heard her turning the grinding stone again and again, though there was no grain left to grind. Your sister walked to the grove at dawn, her feet bare, her eyes rimmed with red. She did not return until the sun was high. For days the house moved without its center. You fetched water, you repaired the fence, you tied vines and salted the meat. You didn't talk about it. No one did. There was no need. His absence spoke louder than any words. The neighbors came, with bread, with olives, with eyes that tried not to look too long. They said things. He was strong. He worked hard. He never complained. You nodded. You thanked them. Then you watched them leave, relieved to be outside. Your grief. One old woman said something you did not forget. She laid a hand on your arm and whispered, "Now you carry the silence." And she was right. You found yourself pausing before each task, asking what he would have done. How deep would he have dug the trench? How tightly would he have tied the cord? Would he have spoken or simply watched? You wore his cloak to the vineyard. It was too long, heavy with dust and sweat, but you didn't remove it. The fabric smelled of smoke and time. You liked the weight. In the evenings, your brother stared at the flame, eyes wide, searching for something you couldn't name. Your sister stopped weaving. Your mother stopped singing. But time, as always, pulled forward. The olives ripened. The hens laid again. The vines bent beneath fruit. You worked. You rose. You slept. And sometimes, in the quiet hour before dawn, you sat beneath the fig tree and listened. Not for his voice, not for his footsteps, but for the echo of them. You began to understand that death does not shout. It lingers in the unfinished fence, the worn handle of a shovel, the way the light touches the place where he once stood. And you, now, are the one who must rise before the sun, who must know the soil, who must carry the silence. You never said goodbye. There wasn't time, but when the wind moves through the grove, just right, when the leaves tremble and the air thickens with memory, you feel him not watching, not judging. Just there, it came sealed in purple wax, brittle from the heat, stamped with the two-headed eagle, a creature that watched both east and west, past and future, life and death. The letter had no weight, just parchment, dust, and a sentence. But when the priest carried it into the square, it felt as though the empire itself had arrived. No one spoke as he broke the seal. You watched from the edge of the crowd, your hands still raw from pruning vines, the sun catching in your eyes. A few elders stood behind him, shoulders stooped, their mouths twitching like they already knew what it would say. The priest cleared his throat. Read it. It was a decree, not addressed to your village by name, no, only to the faithful subjects of the western provinces. It announced, with solemn phrasing and carefully inked flourishes, that His Most Imperial Majesty, Basileus of the Romans, had granted forgiveness. For what? It did not say. It spoke of recent turbulence, of unlawful resistance, of passionate errors of the peasantry, and in the same breath it offered pardon. A gesture of magnanimity, it read, from a father to his children. You saw your mother flinch. Forgiveness, it echoed, through the square like a bell rung too hard, as if your village had confessed something, as if it had asked. The priest looked up, his voice was tight. We are to gather in gratitude this Sunday, to offer thanks, to kneel. No one cheered. No one wept. They simply stood, heads bowed, not in reverence, but in calculation. What did this mean? What did it cost? That night, your sister read the letter again. She had learned her letters from a monk long ago, and though she read slowly, she read carefully. Never says what we did, she whispered. Only what we were forgiven for. You nodded. That's the point. The next day, the village moved differently. Men repaired the chapel door, though it had not truly broken. Women swept the square twice. The children were bathed in the stream and told to stay clean. Bread was baked. A goat slaughtered. On Sunday, the priest led a procession through the olive grove. He carried the letter in both hands, head lowered, lips moving in quiet prayer. Behind him walked the elders, the mothers, the fathers, and finally, the children, holding wildflowers plucked from the ditches. You walked near the front, not from piety, but because your father would have, if he was still alive. At the chapel steps, the priest lifted the letter and read again. His voice shook this time, not from emotion, but from exhaustion, from the weight of saying something. No one believed. When the reading ended, you knelt. You all did. Not to the emperor, not to the decree, but because you had no choice. Afterward, bread was broken, wine was poured, songs were sung. They tried, truly tried, to make it feel like a gift. But the letter remained on the altar, its seal already curling at the edges, the ink smudging in. The heat your mother spat in the dirt as she passed it. That evening you walked alone to the fig tree, dug a little hole, not to bury anything, but to make space a gesture of your own. Then, gently, you dropped in a single olive pit, covered it with soil. A seed, because you needed something that would grow, not because the emperor forgave you, but because you never needed his forgiveness to begin with. Your mother weaves by candlelight now. The days are too hot, the work too long. But in the hush of night, when the smoke has settled, when the chickens sleep, when the world forgets to demand, she returns to the loom, as though the rhythm of thread against thread is the only thing keeping time from slipping entirely. Away, you sit beside her some nights, cross-legged, silent. You do not speak, you listen. The soft creak of the wooden frame, the dry brush of her fingers, the faint breath she lets out every time she completes a row. she weaves with old wool. Bits of flax, scraps taken from garments worn to their last thread. Each strand carries a memory. A cloak worn through 100 winters. A shawl once wrapped around a fevered child. A tunic stained with olive mash and the sweat of 10 harvests. The cloth grows slowly, not a robe, not a tapestry, just a length of fabric, for no one, for nothing. She doesn't say what it will become. Perhaps even she does not know. But you watch her hands, knotted, veined, calloused. The same hands that once cradled your brother's head, that crushed herbs into poultices, that folded dough when there was no yeast, no hope. The hands that dug your father's grave with you. Now they weave. Your sister asks once, why bother? Your mother pauses, then replies, because it is still mine. The loom was built by your grandfather. A simple structure, lashed with leather cords and pine dowels, marked with notches and burns. It has survived floods, fire, plague, and the weight of everything the empire never saw. At night, your mother hums. Not always, not every night, but sometimes, just before sleep, her voice floats above the thread. Old lullabies. Hymns from a time before rules and decrees. You remember one of the songs about a bird that built its nest from broken feathers and wind, about how it sang only in winter when all the other birds had gone. One evening she tells you a story, not with words but with thread. This red, she says, touching a faded strip, came from your uncle's cloak. He wore it to the wedding feast when the rains came. This white, she continues, was from the shroud we never used, for the child who lived. And this, she says, lifting a dull green strand, was from my mother's apron, the one she wiped her hands on every morning before she prayed. You do not cry, but something loosens inside you. A knot, a tightness, because you see it. Now, what she weaves is not just cloth, it is survival, a record, a map made of fiber and grief. By day she still works. She still milks the goat, feeds the fire, mends sandals. But by night she returns to the loom, to the only place where no one commands her, no tax is taken, no decree tells her how to move. You offer to help. She smiles, hands you a spindle. Your fingers are clumsy at first. You tangle the thread, snap it, but she does not scold. She only shows you again and again, until your hands begin to learn. The rhythm of weaving becomes a language, thread under thread. Color beside color, a pulse, a heartbeat, and as you sit beside her, candlelight catching in her grey hair, you realize she is teaching you how to remember, not with words, but with touch, with time, with thread, later. When she is gone, you will find this cloth folded in a wooden chest. You will lift it to your face, and the scent will bring back smoke and soap and sleep. You will not need to say her name. The cloth will say it for you. It began without a plan. No banners, no swords, no whispered oaths beneath moonlight. Just a look, a nod, a silence shared between those who had once been strangers, now bound by what had been taken from them. It was your sister who suggested the chapel, the old one, the first one, long abandoned at the edge of the vineyard, half sunk in soil and shadow. The roof had fallen in places, the doors hung loose on rusted hinges, but the walls still stood, and within them the faint remnants of frescoes clung to the stone like bruises of memory. That night you walked by torchlight, feet wrapped in cloth, to muffle the sound. The stars above were sharp and cold, like blades pressed into velvet. The village lay still behind you, a hush too deep to be peace. One by one, they came. The girl who once sang, her voice now low but steady. The boy who lost a brother to fever, carrying a candle hollowed from wax and dirt. The mother with hands that still bore the imprint of a soldier's lash. The old monk who had vanished seasons ago now returned, his beard longer, his eyes darker, and your mother, too, wrapped in a wool cloak, her face unreadable, her steps slow. No words were spoken. You gathered in a circle, just within the walls. Moss grew between the stones. Ivy clung to the arches. A single oil lamp was lit and placed in the center, its flame trembling but unafraid. Someone brought bread, someone else wine, not in abundance, just enough to remember. You held hands, not all at once, not neatly, but eventually. Rough palms and trembling fingers linking in quiet defiance. Not against the emperor, not against the law, but against the forgetting. This was not about rebellion, not in the way emperors feared. This was about remembering what it meant to belong. The monk spoke first. Not a sermon, not a lesson, just a story about a woman who once saved her village, not with a sword, but with a song. How she stood atop a hill and sang until the invaders thought her mad and turned away. No one knew if it was true. It didn't matter. Then your sister stepped forward. From her cloak, she drew an icon, small, chipped, wrapped in linen. Saint Thecla, the same one buried years ago beneath the fig tree. She placed it on the ground beside the lamp. A breath passed through the room. Not wind, not speech, just breath, shared, held, sacred. You reached into your pouch and pulled free a sprig of rosemary, laid it at the icon's base. Others followed, a coin from a dowry, a carving made from olive wood, a piece of cloth woven by your mother's hands. You knelt, and not to worship, to witness, to say, with your body, what the empire refused to hear. We are still here. The lamp flickered. Someone began to hum. Slowly, softly, others joined. No words. Just sound a lullaby for a world that had forgotten how to listen. You looked around the room, at the cracked walls, the broken altar, the faces lit by fire, and for the first time in years, you felt whole. Not safe, not free, but whole. When the lamp burned low, you took your place at the door, watched them leave, one by one, like shadows. Returning to sleep, your sister lingered last. She pressed her forehead to yours, then vanished into the vines. You stayed, sat cross-legged on the stone. Let the silence settle over your shoulders like a second cloak in the east. A new light stirred behind the hills, but here, in the broken chapel, the fire still glowed, and that was enough. Years pass. You do not mark them by the emperor's reign, nor by the turning of gold-leafed calendars that never reach your hands. You count by harvests, by births and burials, by the thickness of your calluses and the deepening creases in your mother's face, by how much harder it is to rise before dawn, and how much longer the soil takes to thaw in spring. Your body changes. Your breath slows. You speak less. You listen more to the wind in the olive trees, the creak of the well, the distant call of a bird you never learned to name. The village is smaller now. Some moved away. Others faded like smoke. The girl who once sang now walks with a limp and a line of worry above her brow. The monk returned again and stayed. He tills a narrow garden behind the old chapel, his steps steady, his eyes soft. Your sister's children run through the fields. chasing each other with sticks shaped like swords, never knowing the wars that shaped the silence beneath their feet. Your mother weaves less now, but the loom still stands, a monument not to craft, but to memory. The empire still shines in the distance. Its domes catch the sun like polished brass. Its edicts still arrive, written in ink no one can read, stamped with seals no one dares to break. But you no longer wait for the capital, you wait for the rain. The soil is your scripture. Now dot every crack in the clay, every sprout of green, every stone warmed by the sun, all of it speaks, and you have learned, slowly, how to listen. You remember your father's path, down to the smallest rut in the road, the spot where he once paused to tie a sandal, the fig tree he planted and never saw bear fruit. You walk it now, carrying the same basket, heavier with each season, lighter with each step. One morning, you kneel in the vineyard and press your fingers into the earth. Not to sow, not to reap, just to touch. It is warm, damp, alive, and beneath it 1,000 memories stir, prayers whispered in secret, tears shed in silence, feet that bled but never faltered. The empire does not remember these things, but the soil does. It remembers the boy who was beaten for holding an icon, the sister who married a man with empty eyes, the feast where laughter was tasted like bread, the night when rebellion wore no armor, only faith. It remembers your father's final breath beneath the fig tree, your mother's hands steady at the loom, your own voice lifted once in song when you thought no one could hear. You rise slowly, the basket heavy with grapes. Your back aches, your fingers curl with age, but your steps are sure. As you walk home, a breeze moves through the grove. The leaves tremble. The sky glows with the amber hush of late day. You pause, close your eyes, and in that moment, you feel everything. Not the empire, not the gold, not the distant clamor of Constantinople, but the soil, and the way it holds you, not as a subject, but as a seed. As the last embers fade from this forgotten story, I hope it leaves a glow in your own heart. Subscribe if you wish to walk again through the silent pages of history. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Thank you for walking this quiet road through the forgotten lives of Byzantium's peasants. If their voices stirred something within you, I hope you'll return to listen, to feel, to remember. Subscribe if you wish to keep wandering through history's soft shadows, one silent step at a time. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Could you have endured a life ruled by silence, toil, and distant emperors?